Hello, I'm Jim Franks, and this is an episode of our podcast, Verse by Verse, which will explore the insights and lessons from the Word of God, the Bible. The Apostle Paul was a prolific writer. He is generally given credit for writing 13 or 14 books in the New Testament, out of the total number of 27. Now, why 13 or 14? Well, it depends on who you consider the author of Hebrews. In church history up until more recent times, 1800s and beyond, Paul was commonly accepted as the author of Hebrews. That has been disputed in more recent years. But it has been the teaching of the Church of God that Paul was the author of Hebrews, which gives him 14 out of 27 books, which is just over 50%. Another author, Luke the physician, is the most prolific writer in terms of the word count. His two books, the Gospel according to Luke and the Book of Acts, are two of the longest books, making up 27.5% of the New Testament. From the website goodquestionblog.com, Luke is credited with 37,932 words in Greek. Paul's writings, if you include Hebrews, has just slightly fewer words. Between the two of them, Paul and Luke, they wrote more than 50% of the New Testament. Now, when you ask who is the most prolific New Testament writer, you would get two answers. Paul, if you consider the number of books, Luke, if you consider the number of words. But let's talk about Paul before we get to our verse in this episode of our podcast. Theologians have struggled over the writings of Paul. Some from the past went so far as to claim that the Apostle Paul was schizophrenic, since in their minds he couldn't decide if he was for the law or against the law. In their view, the epistles that strongly support the law were written during a different time in Paul's ministry, when he was still moving away from Judaism. But there is no evidence in the Bible of such an assertion. Paul was certainly not against the law, but he was against the idea that no one, or that one could earn his salvation by works of law. All of this background leads me to our verse for today. It is found in the book of Philippians, Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. In a very few words, the Apostle Paul identifies where his strength comes from. The book of Philippians is different from Paul's other letters. Although it contains some correction, notice his naming of Euodia and Syntyche, or Syntyche, two women who were at odds in the local congregation. Paul encourages unity and asks for others to assist these two women in resolving their conflict. Overall, the book of Philippians reads more like a thank you note to the Philippians for their support of Paul, even as he was in prison. This is quite different from what he wrote about Demas, who deserted him for the world. The Philippians stood with Paul and gave him great support during his many trials. Paul even mentions the generosity of the Philippians, especially during the famine in Jerusalem, when Paul asked for help in his letter to the Corinthians. Paul refers to the Philippians in chapter 4, verse 1. Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, beloved. Joy, crown, and beloved are strong words that Paul used in describing the Philippians. He continues in this chapter in the verses following our selected verse for this episode, in verses 14 and 15. Nevertheless, you have done well that you shared in my distress. Now you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only. Verse 13 is one of those summary verses in Paul's writing to the Philippians that it is really a summary of his ministry, which was used to inspire all those in the churches under Paul's guidance. Even though he was more corrective in other letters, he spoke about unity often in all his letters. By giving all the credit to Christ for his accomplishments in his ministry, he promoted unity among the churches to do the same. Whatever we accomplish in the work of God, we must recognize where our strength comes from. And we must recognize that there is no limit to what can be accomplished in a person's life and in the work of the church if we rely on Christ and not ourselves. We must pray for unity in the church, recognizing that it will only come if we give all the credit to God, the Father, and Jesus Christ, who is the head of the church. So hang on to these few words in your personal life and see what God can do with you and through you.
Verse by Verse is a companion podcast to the Daily Bible Verse blog, which you can find on the Life, Hope, and Truth Learning Center. Check out the show notes for more.